me. Then I'm gonna get
This episode of Cello Chat is brought to you by Carriage House Violins of Johnson String Instrument. Please visit us at www.carriagehouseviolins.com.
Okay, and we are live.
Good morning, and I guess good afternoon if you're on the East Coast. We're super excited to be here. I'm Russell. I'm the cellist of the Balourdet Quartet. This is Angela, Ben, and Justin. It's a huge honor to get to be a part of the new EnsembleChat on Cello Bello. I grew up watching all of the Cello Bello Cello chats myself, so it's super cool to be here. So we're the Balourdet Quartet, and we're going to be doing this chat today on building a shared language in rehearsal. So a little bit about us. We've been a quartet now since 2018, and we studied at the New England Conservatory Graduate String Quartet program with Paul Katz and other members of the Cleveland and Borromeo quartets. That was a super fun thing. And now we're currently graduate resident quartet at IU Jacobs School of Music. Yeah, we're super excited to be here today. And so we're in Spokane, Washington today, and we're coming to you from here where we just played 2 concerts with the cellist Zool Bailey, which was pretty awesome. It's another big cello nerding out thing to be a part of. He played some really cool pieces with us. We did actually an arrangement of Schubert Arpeggione Sonata and Couperin of 5 concert pieces. And yesterday we did the Moses variations for quartet and solo cello, which was super fun. Just last week, actually, we recorded an album called Strange Machines with Phenotypic Recordings in Chicago, and Justin's going to talk a little bit about the creative process of that.
Yeah, so I think before we get into the rehearsal stuff, one kind of demonstration of a shared language is also in project building. And the album that we just recorded, I think, is a really great example of collaboration, both between us and in us and some of our peers. So we had this idea to record an album based around our first commission piece, which was by Karim Al-Zand, an amazing composer who teaches at Rice University, where we were formed. And his piece was called Strange Machines. We had no idea what he would give us for this commission, but it's a really witty reworking of Mozart and Bach and these 18th century forms with the idea of musical machinery. So there's like an AI cliche bot, there's a steampunk device, and a Rube Goldberg machine to go along with Bach's Goldberg variations. So Karim's piece inspired us to commission a series of works based around the string quartet, technology, and specifically AI. And we actually played Karim's piece as well as 2 of the other incredible commissions in Spokane, as well as playing with Zool Bailey. But basically we commissioned superstar young composers Paul Novak, Nicky Sohn, and Isaac Smith. Also recorded a work by Nina Young called Memento Mori. We had one really old selection on the album, which was a motet by Guillaume Dufay from the 1400s that Isaac Smith's piece reworks with the use of predictive AI as a backtrack, which is super cool. And then we've recorded an incredible piece by a young composer named Kyle Bren that involved tape recording of an answering machine with his grandfather singing to him, which was really moving. And finally, I made an arrangement of George Antheil's Death of the Machines, which is a 3-minute piano piece. And we had a lot of fun kind of as a group collaborating on that. So I think the collaborative process was we all knew we wanted to record Karim, and we went back and forth about which composers we trusted to commission next, in how to really go about tailoring the album and bringing in all of these wonderful musical voices, as well as Steve Pressman from Phenotypic and our wonderful recording engineer to create this. So it'll be a while before it's out, but we can't wait to share it with you.
Yeah, so I guess on to our main topic for today, which is creating a shared language through rehearsal. So I think this is honestly, for me, I think for everybody who goes into chamber music, one of the most fascinating things, because really it comes from a desire to share music with your friends and you know, we're all in it for the same thing, and we're all kind of sharing our joy and how much we love the music that we're playing. And it's really learning to talk about how the music makes you feel, how you feel when you're playing the music, and, you know, some of the other like sort of issues that happen in the music in a way that like actually communicates how you feel and what you're hearing and experiencing. It's really all based around listening. And I think Angela's got a wonderful metaphor that she's going to talk about with this.
Yeah, so I'm going to be taking you through a train of thought that our group we have been working on for about 6-7 years that we were in a group. We really hope that today's talk will inspire people who are in the short-term group or people who are seeking to find quartets for long-term groups like we are. It really applies to any collaborative situation. And we're just here to talk about our experience and maybe give you some tips to kind of come up with more creative solutions to some struggles or some questions you might have in a collaborative rehearsal. I came up with a pasta box analogy. So basically a rehearsal or looking at a score or playing a part in a quartet feels like we're all looking at different parts of the box of the dry pasta. For example, I could be looking at the brand name and like what kind of pasta, like angel hair, spaghetti, whatever, mac and cheese. I'm looking at that box. Russell might be looking at the nutrition information, and that's all he has. And then Ben might be looking at the cooking instructions with all those pictures. And Justin might be reading the backstory of the brand or the origin story. So no one has the wrong information, but no one has the best information. This is where we understand that everybody has their own perspective based on their own experience and their own background, and that everybody has to drop their ego to be able to share and achieve a common goal. So some of the common goals can be in this situation of a pasta box. Let's make some pasta. Let's come up with the recipe. How about we come up with 3 more recipes? How about we come up with something that's not spaghetti meatball pasta? And this is the part that I really believe what musicians and what chamber music and music making is there to do, is that what if we can do anything we can with this pasta box? How many things can we talk about it? How can I collaborate with Russell with the information we have? How can I collaborate with Ben? And how can I collaborate with all 4 of us to come up with something unimaginable? That's where the magic happens, I think. So we are here to inspire each other's imaginations. The information on the page might be the notes, the rhythm, the dynamic. I don't know. That's kind of basically all you have. But what makes the Balourdet Quartet, what makes me the violinist that I am, is how I use that information and how I use it to create something magical. And just accepting that there are so many possibilities if I can work with people. This is why we think the shared language is a very, very important part. It's very fundamental to build trust in any relationship, as a pair, as a trio, as a quartet. It's very important to build trust within yourself while you're rehearsing in a group. And it really inspires the fullest collaborative potential. And this is probably what people say, that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. I noticed that sometimes rehearsal becomes a space to avoid subjectivity, to seek for objectivity. What I mean by that is that people say music is subjective. Your opinion matters, my opinion matters. Let's agree to disagree. And I'm not sure if that's what people really want to be doing. We often notice conversations pulling people away when you're avoiding the subjectivity and you're avoiding opinions hurting each other's feelings, because no one wants that, and this shouldn't be happening because it's not wrong. No one wants to be correcting each other. And so this is when we started looking out for opportunities to make rehearsal a place to explore the music. And some of the things that we notice is, you're being overly polite and you're saying, let's agree to disagree. We can do that here. So we're really not exploring the music to its fullest potential. That's when we started inspiring each other to kind of push each other, hold each other accountable, own up to your choices and be responsible. And some of the things that I've noticed throughout our couple of years together has been fear-oriented decisions. This comes up a lot because, we have a new piece that we need to perform in 3 days and I'm just nervous about this part. I have this run that I need to do 1,000 times with you guys. I need to tune this because I need to tune that, and I need to like do the tempo change. And when rehearsal becomes a place to fix problems, I personally have never seen that work out very well, because you might fix that problem in that moment and good for you. You got your problem solved, but it really doesn't guarantee, it really doesn't guarantee a trust method or like any kind of better understanding of the music that you're playing for the concert coming up. So why waste time coming up with problems? Why waste time listening out for problems? Another thing we've noticed is the lack of interest. Not that you don't care about the music, it's just that you could sit there for the 2-hour rehearsal you have and passively wait for problems to arise. Rather than, accepting the fact that there are no problems to fix, you have to sit there and listen, as Russell said in the beginning, to discover more and to always talk about more things. And we believe that if all members of the ensemble can show up with this kind of full commitment and a growth mindset, then now the rehearsal is set and the energy is just play. It's a playground. You're just constantly discovering, and you start to learn more about each other in a very open-minded way. One of the ways that I learned is that I tend to read the score and study the score in a very methodical way sometimes. Like I like to do my, this is the 1 area, this is the 5 area. I do like the normal theory approach, which gets me to an understanding. I noticed that Ben really likes to play along with the recordings to kind of, because he likes to learn the pieces by ear a lot of times. So he plays with a lot of recordings, he listens to a lot of recordings. And Russell sometimes discovers the simplest things. He one time showed up to rehearsal and said, I got really into this bass line that's going up. And at first, I'm just sitting there like, I don't really care. I mean, honestly, but then with the mindset that, I learned to have, I was like, oh, that's fascinating. And that actually informs the theoretical approach, or like the score studying approach that I was taking. And then Justin would show up and tell me all about this history of this piece and what year it was written and at what kind of mindset the composer was in. And that really informs me a lot, because it's coming from people that I trust to work with and like love how they commit to their love for the music. And learning about each other's way of expressing their passion, I think is very, very valuable in sharing in building the shared language. So this is my way of thinking of why you need to do this. This is not just about word choices or rehearsal methods we want to talk about, but that kind of really the growth mindset and the way you can really keep the responsibility, hold each other accountable. And we have a few methods and the ways of listening that we have tried that might really help you guys. We'd love to get some questions from you, of course, and any stories you might have on experiences based on this.
Yeah, so I guess I'm going to talk a little bit about the how in all of this. So I've always been fascinated by this idea since I took like high school lit class, honestly, that like language is a prison, which like nothing you ever say to anybody is really going to fully inherently mean what you want to actually say to them, and nothing that's ever said to you really will only mean what that person has said to you, like in their mind, in your mind. So where does this leave us? Does that make sense? Do I sound crazy?
You do sound crazy.
But like, I think that's like one of the most human things, is just like it takes more than just the words you say to really communicate something, and it takes a level of just intention on your end and understanding and empathy on the other person's end. So it's a constant channel of communication that we're trying to create us. So where does this leave all of us? It leaves us with a lot of freedom in rehearsal, actually, by establishing kind of a few ground rules that sort of like create a foundation of respect for each other. We're actually pretty free to say things pretty directly to each other, because like, again, it's not so much about the words you're saying or about how you say it, as much as like, I really want to communicate this thing, which is generally, I want the music to sound great. I love this music. That's, if you boil down every single thing that you say, it really just comes down to that. So I think that by laying down a couple ground rules, and like kind of accepting a couple of things, you sort of create a great baseline for communication. And these ground rules are, I know what works and I want to sound better. And that's true on everybody's end. And I think that's a universal thing. Nobody's like showing up to rehearsal not to have a great time and not to play great. Uh, in an ad hoc setting, I think this is the second rule. In an ad hoc setting, I think we all need to trust that players want you to sound your best and they want you to feel your best. And nobody's hoping that like you do a terrible job. It's only less fun when people like are not having fun with you. In a long-term group, I think it builds to a long-term trust that my friends know when and how I sound and feel the best. If someone's out of, I had a teacher that always would say this: if someone's out of tune, it's me. That's just like a thing that every single person needs to think at all times. And this is true for like togetherness and voicing. Like if something's kind of off in the mix, it's everybody's responsibility all of the time. Uh, and rule number 4 is everybody's reality is right and wrong at the same time, all of the time. And like, I know this sounds like pretty straightforward, but like being able to accept these things, I think really leads to just an openness of communication. Cause like, really, it just never any of the time in rehearsal, it's never that heavy. Like, we all love this music and we all want it to sound great. And guess what? The music usually sounds pretty good by itself. And like, when you're able to talk about it and share this, you're only adding to it. So I have a couple of different categories that I wanted to discuss, like how these kind of rules might apply. So in intonation, I have a thing that like, if everybody could just show up being like an in-tune musician, and like if you get 4 people that play pretty in tune and like you sit down and it just sounds great in a quartet, like there'd be a lot more quartets and like nobody would ever rehearse. So like, I mean, think about it. Like there's so many people play in tune as an individual. I think each of us, we actually reached a point where each of us really felt we were all playing in tune by ourselves, even like with a tuner, even with our open strings, even like listening to like playing playthroughs of our own parts. Like we can all say like, I'm in tune to my own reality, but then we'd like sit down and play together and it would just sound crazy. And so, there's an amount of this where we reached a point of frustration, because like even like sitting together as a group and tuning every single chord vertically like kind of wasn't working as a thing, just because like, again, that's the idea of fixing problems rather than like approaching things from a shared language. So we like actually created a language to talk about intonation. And Ben, if you'd like to talk a little bit about how we kind of came up with the concept behind, we called it, one thing about shared language is it actually can like be really silly or really like basic at all times. So like we have this thing called the monster that we talk about in intonation a lot. Yeah, Ben, if you could say a little bit about that.
Do you want me to only talk about that, or did I go off on...
You can go off on anything you want.
Okay, I guess before I really talk about that, I think I have like, for what we're talking about right now, I think there's a good couple of stories we could actually talk about that lead to why we're talking about this in general. And kind of I feel like we started off as a group of 4 individuals, kind of like Russell was saying, that all kind of had backgrounds going into a lot of solo pieces, wanting to play by ourselves, playing sonatas, playing a lot of solo music, but loving chamber music and just not having the opportunity to really fully explore pieces, like being in groups maybe for 2-3 weeks, and the occasional group where you actually get to rehearse. That was a luxury. So when we actually first met up, we were confronted kind of like very early on with not being able to talk to each other. We'd like spend rehearsals. I don't know. We love to rehearse and we'd like love to hash things out, where we'd spend like 4 hours together, basically disagreeing and talking about the same thing. And we'd say like crazy stuff where we'd be describing things, but we weren't willing to actually listen to each other and what we were actually saying. And it was really wild to find out, usually after the 4 hours, that we could have pretty much solved it if we had just like not really talked while the other person was, and not cut each other off. Like just been like, heard them out. You would have probably like, really understood what was going on. And I think the first story that really changed like how we played. It happened maybe like first month into rehearsing. We had started Opus 127 and we weren't allowed to play it, so we started playing 59-2, which is not easy. And I remember like early on in the rehearsals, Russell and I, it was like early in the rehearsal too. We're just like sitting there and like we just could not play in tune. And we started doing a pair and like no one's budging. And you know how I'm sure every person has been in a quartet where like you're in tune to your open string, you're in tune to whatever you think the chord is, you're not budging. And I remember we just like start talking about it, and I'm like talking about I had studied at Manhattan School with Kopek and Zuckerman, and I'm like sitting there like playing thirds really high. Like I love this like kind of sound of dominant sevens a certain way. And I'm like really sitting there trying to get him to do it. And he's over there having studied with Hans and like really has this like bee up his butt about like cello mind and like the science behind thing. And I remember like he just shouts like midway through the thing, "You're just not a man of science." And I'm like sitting there like, oh man, I really what's going on in my life that I can't even agree with science anymore. And but with like early on, it was really like a moment that started this journey. And I think our first year together, because we really did start, I don't know how many people watching actually know our background, but we really started off as just four friends hanging out late at night. We'd like rehearse from like 7 to 11 p.m., sometimes to midnight. And it was more just a hangout session where we would just explore the music. And it largely came out of rehearsals like that, where we like hit a disagreement and then we'd just be like, oh, whoa, there's something here to actually explore. And that moment, like I still think about that to this day. We're like, it really changed. Both of us, I think, felt pretty bad. Like I think we talked about it like years later. I don't think we ever like brought it up, but like we both started playing more in tune like immediately because we just started listening to each other and going like, okay, each person has a thing they know, and like to trust that that actually could mean something. And I think that was a first journey that we had together. And then we got into the NEC program. We started getting a lot of coachings. We went to Aspen and studied with the Pacificas and the Eschers and a bunch of quartets. And so we started getting a ton of input, and we kind of lost that ability to communicate and rehearse in a certain way. There was a sense of like we were being told what worked, and it did worked really well. But then it was like we were showing up to coachings kind of in the way that we've mentioned, where it's like it's not fear oriented, but it's like you have to play things a certain way, and you're put into a kind of box, and you're actually learning tools that should help you learn how to rehearse, how to break apart a piece, how to function as a quartet, how to know your roles. And it was in many ways the thing that made us who we are. It gives us our sound, the way we think about music, our style, how we like view emotion and character. Like, to its credit, that is who we are, and those things are the core beliefs that we have. But it took us actually, I think, a couple years into like only doing quartet to really get back to talking to each other in the way that like really questioning what we were doing. I remember we had this whole thing where we were going to competitions, and we were trying to loosen up at a certain point because we realized like, man, we sound pretty good, but something's like missing. Like there's like this like raw energy we have, but it's not translating the emotion enough. Like, how do we get there? And we do these crazy things where we were like, people kept saying we sounded stiff. So we were like, all right, we're not going to decide anything. In the moment, we're going to take time. We're going to follow each other so well that anyone can do anything. We call it, we're going to jump off the cliff the second we get on stage, and anything that goes, goes. And there's no fear. You're just going to go for it. If someone wants to do something, follow that to the end of the earth. And oh my God, we had some amazing performances, but we actually sounded tighter. And we get like these comments from jury members, from coaches that like, what's going on? And it was because in some ways, we didn't actually have a language for talking about it. So we would just like be playing really tight, following each other around, but not actually communicating while we were playing. And I think a big coaching that changed that for us, and kind of a big moment, we were in New York playing in this super nice apartment for a cellist, a really famous cellist, Alistair Tate. And he just brought up and kind of shook us a little bit and brought up the idea of pulse. And, you know, we had really good rhythm. We were like messing around with it. We were learning the Wolf Italian Serenade at the time. And we had just been on the same trajectory, really trying to loosen it up, make it feel alive, make it feel like really inspired music making. And he just like brought up that the way we were kind of approaching pulse was not metronomic. It was very free, but it was rigid at the same time. There was no space for how it could grow, how it could go somewhere. And he brought up this kind of reality check of like, in Chinese medicine, they take the pulse in like 3 different places, and how the pulse moves from place to place through that system actually gives you characters and energy, and how that moves tells you how you feel or the problems that you might be having, conveys something. And you start thinking about how you play that way, you start to understand swing, and you start to understand how human actually music is. And you can't sit there and try to like really manipulate everything. You have to find a curve, you have to find a way to communicate through each other's pulse while you're playing so that it actually is natural. It took us maybe a year after that to really be able to implement it. And I think he gave it to us at the right point where we were like really starting to question a lot of what we were doing. And about a year later, we came up with this thing where we kept getting comments that we were really out of tune again. So we're like, okay, we thought we were pretty in tune. We're like sitting there, we're like building our chord, you know, doing their stuff. We're just like, man, I think we're totally fine. Like, what's with this? Like, why do people keep telling us this? And we go, well, they can't be wrong. So that was where we started with, and this is the whole thing. Everyone is always right. They always have a way of looking at something that is true to them, and you have to really be able to listen and understand that. And it wasn't really until that moment that we like kind of let go that we knew what intonation was and we knew what in tune was, that we were able to actually understand something. So we kind of came up with this idea of defining language, and this is kind of where the whole thing gets into how we started building. We just came up with a random topic, and we started doing it with pulse, we did it with tone, we did it with rhythm, and intonation was kind of the big one that things came down to because it was so simple. It's either it is or it isn't, was kind of the vibe. And we started with unison notes, and we spent maybe like the first rehearsal, all we did was sit there and practice unison notes across our instruments in pairs. And we do it where like people would adjust for the 2 playing, so you could like learn to hear how high or low worked, and we could like really learn to know if we could actually hear what in tune was. And the thing that we found immediately was we all actually agreed, and we were able to play very in tune if we were open to it and not rigid to staying in one place. And we kind of came up with this way of listening that we called the monster, because we had no way of thinking of things and we needed like a word for it, so we just called it monster. And it was this like idea of how you actually listen in a way that is both giving and receiving. You're never right, nothing is rigid, but you're also never wrong. You're creating in the moment and making the music come to life. And that happened, you can do it with almost anything. It's just a way of communication. And for us, I feel like we could coach it to a group in like a couple hours. Like they would get why we call it the monster, because it's like this weird 5th entity that like you can't really define why you're able to like tap into this. But it was a core thing where if you're giving up that ego of yourself, you were able to actually find something that was almost more true in the music. And in the most practical sense, it was more in tune. And we would show up to like our concerts the next month, and we'd always record and look back, and we'd talk about it, and we couldn't believe how different we sounded. And that was pretty incredible. I don't know if you have more you want to talk about. I have more like the how stuff of this, but
I'd be pretty interested to hear about the how part of this.
okay. Cool. Okay, so when we first started doing this, the idea was, as a group, you have a practical thing where you have to, if you really want to build this, you have 2 things you can do. And this is not building monsters, I'm just talking about how you can build a shared language. And you can do this in 2 ways. Like when we were really getting coached a lot, we found ways of like how to explore what a coach is telling you. And that's one way. But you also have you have total freedom and you have some time, which we think is the best way. Picking a simple thing to play or a simple topic to work on. And the key thing is simplicity. You want to be able to remove as much that can get in the way and make you focus on problems in your playing or uncomfortability. You just want to be able to be wrong all the time and explore what it could mean to actually be something different. So a lot of times we play chorales, we play scales, we'd even just like tune chords. And sometimes we do like a really early Haydn, like, or something that was like so unbelievably easy, like a pop tune. Like I think some of our early like Christmas like songs and stuff, those were actually things that like they were just like a day where we just were like arranging something for the fun of like rehearsing around. They weren't supposed to be like a serious thing. And then we just had to record it at the end, and that was actually more chaotic because we were having more fun doing the other thing. But the idea is you have this simplicity that you're doing, and you pick some rules around it so you don't have to think too much. So like with chorales, like a kind of given is you can do non-vib or vib, and like what are you going to focus on? You know, a lot of times we remove the vibrato, we focus on making sure we just are moving the bow, not trying to overshape. And you can focus also on if there's a leading person or initiator, or if everyone is kind of just allowed to exist and there's no leader or follower. And a lot of times it's you want to get rid of shape plans if you're not thinking about shaping as the thing you were working on topic wise. That way everyone is just kind of focused on one thing and exploring one topic and what that allows for. So we've done with intonation even like where you can adjust your notes, but like what's wrong with just kind of letting it be and really letting yourself listen to what the chords could be and making sure like everyone is really participating and just listening to what is going on. And sometimes that actually will inform you, where you remove yourself just a little bit from the sole responsibility of having to tune and allow yourself to experience what it sounds like when it's in tune, what it sounds like when it's out of tune, and how do you know if you are in tune or out of tune, or like how do you know if your shaping is actually shaping, that kind of thing. So those are like really practicals of how you set up the exercise. And then once you're doing this exercise, which is like basic one, simple again, is just like doing a chorale, no vib, play slow, listening to each other. And the key thing is after you're done, talk about what you found, what worked. Don't focus on just the problems, but focus on what you found and discovered. This is the idea of like you're aiming to actually create something and discover something. Sometimes there's nothing there, and that's when you look into your rules and you look for maybe a bigger objective or a smaller objective, like get smaller, get bigger. Those are ways to like kind of amplify your listening ability. And you kind of want to give every person a chance to explore. So a lot of times we talk about our use of time in rehearsal, and you always kind of want at least 50% of the time to be playing. But at the same time, you also want to give each person an ability to lead the rehearsal or lead the discussion in a way that they can really explore something if they're finding something. You want to have people sit out a lot of the time when you're doing this. Sometimes just being able to sit out and listen to two people really rehearse and find something will tell you more about how they're feeling, how they're listening, and that will build this language. And this is where the words you get into are very important. Be careful of overusing words you already know, and don't be scared of just coming up with new stuff or trying to describe things that you can't describe, and like really getting each other to listen to that. There's something with like it's silly and sometimes it feels weird to be like wrong or feel like maybe you aren't hearing something, and it's being able to describe and actually communicate with each other what you want that is so important. Yeah, and I think that the key thing is always like trying to understand what did you notice happened versus like I think what were you looking for to happen. Because if you're like looking for the answer, you're only going to hear the same thing you always hear. But if you're trying to notice something new or what the possibilities were that were allowed from those simple rules that you set up, that's when you start to find new things and new things to explore. Yeah, don't worry about perfection. That was kind of like the other thing. Yeah, I mean that's pretty good. Do you have anything you want to talk about with
Sure. I guess I have a couple of things to say. One is like I guess I feel like we've been able to really create a good structure of language, like you said, like by basically like not creating judgments about other people's ideas or honestly even what's good and bad. It's a lot more fun that way and often can lead to a lot more silly discussions, and it can be really disarming in a lot of ways to talk about very serious music in a way that like is kind of goofy a lot of the time. Of course, it's always very soulful, but it like very much comes from the heart. And I guess I feel like when somebody says something in rehearsal, it's not really your job necessarily to experience the music as them, but it's important to understand where they're coming from because their experience is valid. A big part of that is shedding your ego and being able to admit that you couldn't possibly know. You're not in that person's brain. You couldn't possibly hear what they're hearing as you're playing, and that's good. They're hearing something that you're not. So, and I know that it's easier said than done because like when you're in the moment, you're like, I played in tune, I played great that time. But like there really is like your your friends are there in rehearsal with you for the betterment of you and for your own benefit. They're really not there to like shut you down or like make you less creative or sound worse or anything like that. It's perfectly okay to like, and it even helps to grow your language to be able to say like, I wasn't listening for what you just heard. Let's play it again and I'll try to feel what it is that you're talking about. I feel like a lot of the time in rehearsal discussions, we get like really caught up in, I always call it like the recording we hear in our heads because everybody's got a favorite recording of each Beethoven quartet they hear, even if it's a piece that's not recorded. You've got a way that you think that the piece goes, and every single person has a way that they think this piece should go, and that's great because that's showing up prepared, that's knowing how the work goes. But I think it's in those moments of disagreement or just hearing something different or listening for something different that we really find these opportunities to actually shape something and like actually talk about what we're feeling in that moment, because almost always the places that you're going to have disagreements are the best places in the music because everybody's going to have a strong opinion about the best places in the music.
And like what we're talking about is more a mentality that you are bringing to a rehearsal, not necessarily something you have to be doing and working on. It's like if you show up as an individual willing to listen and actually describe what you are feeling, or really listening to what someone else is and trying to understand that, you're going to go a long way. And as a group, even, you'll start to have more fun. You'll start to actually sound way crazier and way better, like all the time. I think like a lot of times we felt our music started conveying like exactly what we wanted. And you're kind of in the moment in concerts, not feeling like you have to play perfect and that you're playing better than you've ever played because you're communicating to each other on stage. And that's what chamber music is all about. It's that conversation that you have.
I saw some questions that were coming in, and I think this question we get quite often, and it kind of goes off of the points they were just making. So I'll start with this one, which is how do you handle moments where members fundamentally disagree on musical ideas? So from what we talked about, I think it could relate to what the example Russell was saying, that like we each have a recording playing in our heads, and it's when we learn to believe and we learn to know that it has to be different if your music if you want your music to have depth and expression and convey something that's very powerful and unique. So what some people, sometimes it comes down to people say like, oh, can you get rid of that accent on the downbeat? It just doesn't sound good. And then, sometimes somebody says, I think I gave Justin that comment yesterday in our hide, and I was like, oh, can you not accent the downbeat? And Justin said, all right, he had no problem not accenting the downbeat. But let's say we have a coaching tomorrow and we play it. There might be somebody who says, hey, Justin, I can't hear the first note of that part. And then it becomes like this whole I told you so, or like a whole I knew I was right. And so we don't love answering this question because we don't think that question is necessary. There is fundamentally different musical values have to exist in order for your music to exist. It's just we're encouraging people for chamber music, especially, to build that courage and to be vulnerable, to build creative pathways to understand that disagreement, understand the polar opposites, and just build something new out of the two very different point of views. It's really if you can try it a couple times, I'm sure you'll find things that have nothing to do with like accent or no accent. It really doesn't come down to it. Those are quick fixes that just like kind of fly by. And even the intonation story that Ben was talking about, the thirds, yeah, they were fundamentally disagreeing, but it just came down to neither of them were listening to the extent that they should have in that moment.
Yeah. And there's like even more practical stuff. Like if you talk to any great quartet, the more you're together, the more strong your opinions get. And there's this kind of like motto a lot of quartets live by is like, you have to try everyone's idea. And a lot of times with quartets, you have especially when you start having concerts, you can literally try everyone's idea in concerts. And a lot of times people will flip flop on what they think was right or what they love. And there's some famous quartet stories from the Juilliards, the Guarneris, and the Clevelands, especially where it's like they might have totally disagreed, but they would pick one for one concert, they pick one for the other concert, and a lot of times they were both good. And I think that's the thing to find. And I remember when I was in high school, I had a teacher at a festival once, and he was really nice. I actually had a problem like this where it came down to like a bowing because I really liked the gesture and I wanted to play my viola solo really loud. And he was like, I think what I found in my quartet that was really useful is I would just kind of do whatever people asked of me as much as I could. And then the concert, if I didn't do it, usually they didn't notice. And I think he was actually a little bit bluffing to me, which I found really funny because it's the more I did their idea, the more likely I was to really appreciate it and start to understand it and add my idea into that. And that's what I kind of found most of the time. That's actually the advice I got out of that was he was just trying to get me out of my own head and out of my comfort zone and really understand what someone else was hearing.
That's something good. That's good. So I recently started reading Annie Fullard's incredible new book, which deals with a lot of these topics. And she said a lot of these points, and everybody go out and get it because it's an incredible resource. But, one thing Annie says in the book is that compromise is always good. And I think that's an interesting point because I think more the point that we're getting at, and I think she would agree with this because she talks so much about commitment, and we're all talking about commitment to the idea. Half doing an idea or half doing a combination of ideas isn't necessarily what we're talking about. It's something that is much more something else. It goes back to this is all about discovery, all about exploring. And the thing is, there's always something else that nobody's found yet. And I think that's more inspiring. And of course, there's a path where you have to agree on certain fundamentals. Like, are we playing Haydn relatively non-vib or not? Or, with things like that. But the more and more time goes on, I used to think, we have to decide in our Haydn how much we're vibrating or like who we're playing this coaching for or something like that. But in reality, the things that coaches and teachers talk about actually have very little to do with the surface level stuff that you might notice just listening to recordings. And more times than not, recordings that seem very different from each other will actually be playing with very similar kinds of concepts. Like the Cleveland Quartet and Quatuor Ben, or the chiaroscuro Quartet, they're all going to play incredibly differently, but they will actually be dealing with other ideas. Yeah.
We've got a number of really great questions, so I just want to make sure that we answer quite a few of these. The first of which is, what role does score study individually versus together play in developing a shared language? I think one of the really amazing things that we sort of first got to do as a quartet is work with Nick Kitchen of the Borromeo Quartet, and he sort of really shaped on how we think about this. There's a lot that you can read online about how he deals with Beethoven manuscripts and like what each different marking means within Beethoven, and it also translates to all sorts of different music. And I think, being able to like read sort of dynamic markings and just any marking in the music, being able to like talk about what could that possibly mean within the emotional scope of this piece. On a more general level, what's the emotional character of this area? And, sort of being able to contextualize a lot of the things that we deal with when we're score studying and sort of what they could actually mean in the music. And then, rehearsing out your details based on those kinds of things rather than like, rehearsing the thing and then like trying to figure out and like put on top of it the emotional details and language and emotion in it.
I think one of the things I value in score studying individually is that everybody has to do it. you should build an opinion of how you're reading that piece of music, that piece of that 8-bar phrase, whatever, that movement, that repeat. You should have an opinion, because if somebody shows up and it just seems like they haven't thought about it, whatever I say is either just going to be like disagreed because they don't like it, and it just creates a weird miscommunication, because but then knowing that everybody's coming in reading the score in the way they would love to read the score, and then from there knowing that everybody's committed to making magic out of this, then this brings us the pasta box again. Like, I'm looking at it in one way, and then I keep talking about it one way, and I'm only talking about the pasta brand. But if I could keep an open mind and get some nutrition facts and get some cooking instructions, then my perspective will just be a little deeper. Like I also say, 2-dimensional reading versus 3-dimensional. It just kind of fulfills, honestly, it probably agrees and makes my thing a little more special. So I think score studying individually is very important. Build your own opinion, build your own love for the music that's for you to nurture as an artist, and then bring it into rehearsal with a lot of confidence, and then read it together in a different way, completely different way. Be open-minded, and discover what you can say in the group together through that.
And we had, I think, every kind of coach on the planet tell us to score study in different ways, and like they all kind of end up having similar things in the basics. Like, you want to know what the primary voice is, like what you want to be hearing, and you always want to know what character you're trying to convey. And a lot of times, like when early on, you don't actually have to know the score, but it's the more you rehearse, you'll want to explore and actually find out what a lot of this means that you're seeing in the part, and what makes these pieces great. Like, if you think back to, I think it was Robert Mann talked about how if you look at old music as new music, and you always have something to discover, and new music as old music with built-in tradition and huge amounts of why the language is what it is, there's so much to explore and find, and every composer is different, and the longer you stay together, the more your language of reading the actual score changes, and you'll start to look at Schubert and Beethoven and Mozart completely different the more you're together, and depending on what pieces you're playing next to each other, even on the program, and what key it is.
We've got another question from Milo. Hi, Milo. How do you guys practice fast passages? And I think that's become like another thing of like language, where like we're understanding like some of the bigger structures of those passages. I mean, everybody's done all their woodshedding kind of in private, but like there's a way that like we're always trying to feel harmonically where those are going, and sort of feel like big destination points. I often talk about this thing where when you watch like two friends walking together, when they know where they're going, like their feet actually move together quite naturally, no matter how fast they're going to that place. I think as human beings, like just being able to create destinations and goals within a passage, and understanding, like just having that larger score understanding of what's going on, actually creates a lot more clarity in what we should actually do during fast passages. And when we're thinking about it in this musical way, it doesn't feel as rigid when we're playing together.
You know, there's something with fast stuff. If you know what you're trying to express, and you're not just trying to play fast, you will be able to play as fast as you want, and often too fast, because the more you actually have to convey, the less fast it needs to be.
Yeah, I think as a violinist, I can speak about this, that I can go sometimes it's easier for me to go
She goes
fast.
too fast.
I go too fast, and then I'm like, if I go and 5 clicks slower than that, I can't, like my fingers are gonna slip off. I'm sure you all have felt that sensation that you just have to go fast. And like playing with the quartet, and again, I'll just say, like, I could just easily say, why is Russell so slow? Or I could just be like, oh, they must be hearing something. Like there is something that like the bass line gives if we're playing a unison run. For that, there's something that the cello gives that gives a different kind of weight and curve. We call it a curve to the music that as like a violinist, I'm not that equipped to listening. So we could do a really, really slow passage of like, oh, that's the harmonic thing, that's the string crossing that you're feeling that I don't have. Like, so for me, I kind of like to logic things out like that, and then understand where everybody's coming from, and then use that to develop my thing into a new thing. And then I can play it in like any medium, fast, slow, whatever tempo I want. And then on stage, it becomes like what musically makes sense today in this moment, in this context, rather than like I can only play this at 120 like miles per hour.
I can take the next one.
Yeah.
Do you record rehearsals was one of the questions we're getting. And we've actually recorded a lot. We record concerts, we record parts of rehearsals, run-throughs, coachings. If you always ask the coach, though, make sure you do that. And often, I think the problem with bringing in recordings is it's not to prove your point, and it's not to prove anything, honestly. It's another version of exploring and being okay with being wrong. A lot of times, the recordings will sound completely different than what it sounds like in the room, but they offer something very constructive in what you could gain from them, because a lot of times they show you kind of what is actually simply coming across. And we found when we were originally recording for competitions, especially early on, we had access at Rice University to their recording equipment, and we'd sit there and actually rehearse and record ourselves and listen back, and that really helped us understand what we were talking about with each other, because you'd really hear how different strokes work, how it sounds like when you're really in tune, what it sounds like when you're like playing the dynamics really soft versus really loud, and it does it actually have anything to do with how loud you're playing versus the feeling that you give it. Those were the things we learned very often from actually listening back. I think a crazier thing to do is really record the conversations you had. We actually recorded ourselves playing Bach chorales for a little while a couple years ago, and really rehearsing, and we'd listen back to like actually how we talked, and that was really interesting in the sense of like how we each take what each other said. I think that's the hardest one to do constructively, because it really requires everyone to be very open and like non-judgmental. Because no one likes hearing themselves speak, I'll tell you that. But I think it's always constructive as long as you're open and willing to be wrong and willing to explore things.
Yeah, I would like to combine two of the questions. One of them is, how do you keep rehearsal language fresh and creative across intense touring? Great question. And another one is, how do you cultivate deep listening as a group skill? Is that what you were gonna do too? See, this is what that he was gonna do the same thing. We're building a shared language right in front of you, live streamed. Well, I think well, he probably has a different answer, but while on tour, it actually, the time that we get to play our instruments together, or even the time that we get to sit down and get a meal together, it's very, very valuable, because that's the time to check in up and cultivate our deep listening. It's not that you have to sit there and train your skill as we have done that before, where we sit and be like, everybody listen really hard, like let's talk about it after, and then like there's absolutely nothing to talk about. You're like, I'm really listening like to nothing, like, you know, so there's no forcing that you need to do. I think how you get to that point of like, oh, I'm listening better than I was yesterday, like that's all you want to get to. There's no perfect listening, because we're not looking for perfection. It's that is everybody in the same like healthy mindset? Like, is everybody open to create some music tonight in concert, or to explore it in rehearsal? Sometimes our rehearsals are a little like little dull, as in like the creative energy is a little dull, but when we all feel that, and all you need is that one person to just kind of like kick it a little extra hard for the group that day, or notice that like you're feeling a little down, so like there's no need to bring it into your group. So all that kind of stuff we learned through the intense touring, and that it's not something that it is kept fresh and creative, because we're every day each of us are working on this, and the dropping the ego and always being open-minded and always having the growth mindset. It's actually not like a skill that you acquire and you can just like forget about it. It's something that you have to wake up and remind yourself to do, because that's just how it is. And I think that's how it's fresh and creative, and that every day we live a different life, every day we're in a different city, keeps it fresh. And that really helps us cultivate the deep listening. It's just kind of how to live together, rather than like, how do I sit down and practice deep listening?
And on tour, I think this was similar to like what we found at competitions, even is like when you show up to a competition or you show up on tour, your goal is not to perfect everything and play it exactly how you've played it every day of your life before that. It's to keep exploring the music. And I think that's kind of back to the fear-oriented kind of playing, where it's like And it sounds kind of silly to keep saying theory oriented, but there's this kind of sense of like, it has to be this. And there's like only a max amount of times you can really do something one way where it actually is fresh. Because if you're just trying to play it exactly how you played it before, like you're not that person from like last week or even yesterday. It's like the idea can still be there and still be what you're trying to convey, but you don't need to play it perfectly. You need to make it come to life. And a lot of times the language and the things that you learn is how to actually express and be fresh in the music comes from exploring it even more, not keeping a rigid idea of what the piece has to be. And you see that, I mean, no one would play quartets as long as some of these great quartets have if all you did was play it the same way every time.
Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say with the playing it the same way every time thing, like there is an element of, even if you have a problem not being able to play stuff the same way repeatedly, I think the worst way to approach that is still trying to play it the same way every time. All of this stuff kind of goes to a more comprehensive way of listening, where you're always listening for something else that you haven't heard before, kind of thing.
I guess the thing I was going to say relates to one of the questions, which is what happens when someone is having an off day? How do you support each other? Which part of building a shared language, especially during touring and especially playing concerts, I think it comes from, each of us wants the concert to go great. And like at various points, I'll speak for myself because I am me. I think that like you start going, oh my gosh, this piece is really hard. Like, I need to play this part good. I need to play that part good. I need to do this. I need to do that. And what happens in a lot of these moments is, and this is the luxury of playing chamber music. This is the luxury of playing with your friends, is that, I actually like kind of lock up a little bit in those moments. And like a lot of times I'm just like playing it safe and like getting to know each other and having spoken about all of these things during rehearsal, sort of know, like the more that you talk, actually, the more that you kind of gain an understanding of what makes each person tick. So having that understanding, each of them has an understanding of me and like what I might do under pressure, and is really able actually to like sort of dial into like the things that I focus on when I'm in the creative zone, the things that I might be hearing, things that'll help me like actually be, I always call it like a conductor of energy, because you want the whole quartet actually to all be conductors of electricity when you're playing on stage. You don't want anybody to just be like, I think it's a capacitor that just like totally stops like a circuit. So in those moments, I think I'm actually, it's a real opportunity to get to like let that ego go, let that feeling of safety go, and like understand like if I don't play this one thing like the best that it's ever been played today, like it's okay. But usually, honestly, once you're able to let that go, you actually play it quite a bit better, and like you feel those kinds of changes in mentality actually I feel translate a lot more on stage than actually just maybe drilling it or just like getting tight and like trying to just like really get the thing right, if that makes sense. So I think that's sort of how we help support each other on off days.
Kind of dealing with the questions of like unproductive rehearsals that are getting tense, or addressing something versus like letting it go. And even on this last, yeah, I think those are good things to address. I think part of it is like that always seems to be addressing that there's like a weakness in the group, that something is either lacking, probably like it's getting tense because someone can't do something or someone is unwilling to do something. And a lot of times it's like, I think better to, I would say this on both sides. So usually the person that has a problem with someone else, or if you can't agree, both people need to always be willing to remember that this is also good for the last question we have on here. Like basic advice for any quartet going out there is everyone wants to be doing their best, and no one is there to sound bad, and no one is there because they think their ideas can sabotage the group and make them sound so awful that no one ever plays with you again. No one is there for that. So it's like, if you remember that, like a lot of times disagreements and discussions become like a playground for creativity, and it's being able to not just let things go, but actually explore them or see if they are the same thing. Kind of that early story I told where Russell said I wasn't a man of science. that is like where we actually figured out we were talking about the same thing with music. We were both looking for how to tune chords. We just didn't know how to tune dominant chords, because it doesn't work the same way as a major chord without a seven. You know, like you have to figure that out as a quartet when you're sitting there, and you have to figure out that, well, oh my gosh, the second you put a chord in an inversion, none of the science stuff is the same. You have to figure it out again. And the science is there. You figure out all the overtones, and like, oh no, the voicing, like the cello's in a different octave, the violin's lower. Like every little thing becomes a new adventure and a new way to communicate. And it's discovering the places where you can meet on something that are so important.
I think for me, sometimes in like, being quite honest, like sometimes in like a dress rehearsal, you are really feeling that pressure, and like you're getting these comments, and it's just like, I'm playing that well. Like what is that person? Shut up. And there's those little moments, and it's, you know, being able to, it's actually like a step by step kind of thing for me. Like you take yourself out of that feeling and you go like, well, they've been right in the past about my playing, and they've heard me sound pretty good sometimes. And you know, what do I know? I don't know. I don't know a single thing about anything. Like I don't know how I sound. I'm not hearing myself. So like being able to just like separate yourself, and I have a rule for myself that like if I'm able to do that, and like later on, like if hour after the concert I still feel like I want to talk about whatever that thing was, like I'll talk about it. But I would say 99.9% of the time it's just you just like not wanting to do something, or like being worried about the concert. And it's really always a team effort. And chances are, if you're able to let that thing go in the moment in that concert with that thing that you maybe were having a hard time with in rehearsal, you're gonna feel a lot safer on stage having actually like attempted somebody else's thing than if you just decided to stay in your own shell.
Yeah, I think it's just really the situations are really funny when like the things get really tense in rehearsal or dress rehearsal, or the air is like a little, the best thing probably is like just take a break, and you take 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and every healthy, high functioning creative artist would have like reflected and just kind of like chilled and come back to just work again. No one needs to apologize. No one needs to like address the thing and have like a heart to heart about like, oh, I'm sorry I hurt your feelings. So, everybody's coming from a good place. So I think that's very important, which kind of leads to like, how do we build trust off stage, and how does this translate into musical connection on stage? For those of you who know our group, we spend quite a bit of time together without our instruments. And as we were looking for more musical things, and as we were trying to develop a deeper understanding of the music, we actually probably started hanging out more outside. And we probably kept doing it, and we keep doing it because we feel that translate directly into the music like every single day. One little memory that you make with somebody, it goes a really long way. And at the end of the day, we're all here for the music, but if you shut that down even further down, it's you're here for the relationship, and how that relationship can affect and relate to others, like our fans and our audiences and the community that we're building around. So if we believe that if we're here not being able to hang out, and or like enjoy food together, we're for people, our personalities are very much like whatever happens off stage translates on stage. So we cultivate our relationship out off stage as much as we do with our instruments. And we notice that we just sound better, and we have, sillier inside jokes that could happen on stage. And these are some of the things that I really tell younger students when we go teach at summer festivals, like get ice cream with your group, like get a meal with your group, like learn about them, ask questions, be curious, and remember it, and engage with it. So Russell really likes dogs. So every time I see a dog, I would like just send him a picture of a dog, and even like that kind of thing, like very basic things. And he might be like, I really don't like that you send me dog pictures all the time. And then I would be like, oh, I thought I only did that because I thought you like dogs, but maybe you like seeing them more. So maybe next time we just go like and see a dog together, you know? I don't, it's
For the
just a
record,
really,
I like it when people send me pictures.
yeah,
of dogs.
he really does. But it's just, it's just assumptions and learning. And even if we spend so much time together for the past 7 years, there's something to learn about that person every single day. And now like we're at a point where like all the telepathic jokes and all the telepathic humor and timing that surprises us, and it's like really fun. And that happens on stage more often. And it's and then having a better understanding of each other. Actually, there's another question. It's like, how do you address issues of ensemble blend and balance in real time in various different venues? So when you understand the person, not the problem of their playing or whatever they're expressing, if you understand each other better, then even if I don't really comprehend what's going on stage, like why is Ben playing so loud today? Like it sounds really loud, but then I know him that he's probably hearing whatever he's hearing that's making him do that, and that's not my problem to fix or react negatively on stage and be like, oh, I'm gonna play louder than him. It's like, oh, he's probably putting his best efforts into create, and I probably am not hearing something that he's hearing. What do I know? This is what Russell was saying, like, what, I don't know anything. It's like, and then it'd be like, oh, that's kind of fun hearing him loud for the first time, like I've never heard that part. So I always try to flip my mindset into like a good positive thinking, and like nothing's gonna go wrong. And if our audiences come up and say your violist was really loud today, I'll be like, great. And then if our audience says like your violist was really soft today, I'll be like, wow, my perspective was so off. That's really interesting.
I think the real time stuff, like when you're going in halls, anytime you get a chance, I think always kind of send a person out, and they don't have to say anything. It's just the more you get to hear what you guys sound like, the better. And I mean, it helps having a phone out there recording too. That's always helpful, and people listening back, super helpful. But there is a sense of like, you can only do so much. So you rehearse as much as you can. You find the things that make your sound. Like, how do you put your sounds in the middle of the group, and kind of some basic ensemble stuff of like strokes in a hall, like if the hall is really wet or super dry, like how that works. And you can go out and have people listen and actually see what it sounds like in a completely dead hall, which if you're in the United States and you're a young emerging quartet, you'll be playing in some of the most dead libraries and churches that have carpets that you have ever seen. And you'll learn to actually like produce your own resonance and cater to those halls when you need to. But you'll also find a lot of times you don't want to really change to the halls you're playing in necessarily, unless you really have to, because the second people are in it and you go on stage, it's going to be a completely different thing. It's going to be more humid. It's going to be way hotter usually, or way colder because they've ran the AC while you guys were off stage. And the acoustic is going to sound completely different. And sometimes it's shockingly good, and sometimes it's shockingly bad, and you will hear no one else. So you have to build those kinds of trust mechanisms that everyone is playing how they've rehearsed and listening for the things that you've been rehearsing for, and kind of following the storyline, or the following the primary voices and all the things that you want to have come across. And those are the things that help kind of knit and pull a quartet together and make an amazing performance. And just the more you perform, the more you'll figure out those things on the road. But I remember our first like year touring, we would show up to certain places and have no idea how to get a piece to come to life. We played this one piece by Nina Young, Memento Mori, which we just recorded in Chicago last week. And I remember we showed up somewhere that was completely dead, and this like kind of spectrally minimalist piece we're playing, and without any like background resonance, just sounded so weird. And it sounded kind of awful, honestly. And it just sounded like we were kind of beeping and booping around, but you couldn't hear it because we were playing so soft, and you couldn't hear that there was actually chords being pulled long across like 40 bars. And it really taught us like how much to kind of think about our interpretations and not just rely on the ease of the room you're in when you're rehearsing, and like really think about what's coming across all the time.
I think on that note, like a lot of the thing with working with rooms, or like just like being able to play in a variety of different spaces and balance to the space, a lot of it actually is in the exercise of almost treating the room like whatever room you're in, it has the fifth person in the group. So like there's an amount of like listening and hearing like what it means to be loud today. Like Angela said, it doesn't mean one thing. Nothing, no word no concept, nothing really means a singular thing. So I think it's actually being able to engage in the thing that's listening for like whatever that means today, and like just being completely in the moment and always having your ears out, that really helps create something that's completely alive and in the moment. We do have a running joke about the hall that it doesn't matter what you rehearse in the hall beforehand, because like once there's people in there it's completely different, but at the same time it's the thing of like trying to get to know the hall on the day of the concert, trying to like really have your ears up, like I said, and engage in that makes all of the difference.
I think one thing that we found really crazy going to halls early on was communicating emotion and sending a person out there. I remember we had some of our most tense rehearsals was sending a person out and the person coming back and saying, everything sounds very dead and I don't feel the emotion, I only see it. And we'd sit there trying to actually figure out how to convey and project characters and emotion and pull a story through a piece. And we learned a lot of times in bigger rooms how to do that versus just in a practice room.
Yeah, so that's our talk today on building a shared language through rehearsal. I think honestly, it just creates a lot of fun in rehearsal, and it creates a good kind of chaos. And I hope everybody has a lot of fun getting to sort of explore some of these ideas, and can't wait to hear the kinds of ideas that people come up with together. No four people are the same, and that's great. That's awesome. Yeah, so thanks for joining us, and this was a lot of fun. Thank you.
See ya.